Okay, welcome very, very much to Conversation. A pleasure to welcome to the program Sara Flounders. She's the co-founder and I guess the co-director of the International Action Center that was founded along with Ramsey Clark, who is a international hero of mine and the world's. And I congratulate you on that and all the good work you've been doing there, including the People's Tribunal against War Crimes in Iraq that you pulled off after that, which was really good and very appropriate. And Sara, welcome so very much on this 27th of October, 2011.
Thank you. It's good to be here talking.
A lot going on.
Yes.
You understand, I've been to Libya about 8 or 9 times, had a great understanding of that country and appreciation of it, and also the person is Muammar Gaddafi, who's been murdered. I wonder if maybe we could talk about that. You sent me a post recently, and the events in the country of Libya are worth consideration, maybe with some historical background to why it was that there was such animus by Eurocentric and American imperialistic forces to target the man onto assassination. But could you share, maybe Libya, let's focus on Libya.
All right. Well, this week in the news, of course, is the murder, and we should really call it a lynching, because that is what happened. That is what this brutal murder, beating, dragging, torture of Muammar Gaddafi by these militia bands really amounts to. It's the U.S. and NATO that have to be blamed totally for this, because this entire war couldn't have lasted a day without the nonstop bombing that went on for 7 months. And that's a real crime. What it did to all of Libya. 6.5 million people who had built such a high level of a modern society with free health care, free education. Everything was subsidized. People owned their own home. There was no such thing as a landlord. There was no such thing as paying rent or having a mortgage.
It was a unique system that he had set up that may have been ahead of history's curve.
And that is what has been destroyed, because the bombs were not, of course, just to hit Gaddafi. The bombs were to destroy what had been built with a nationalized oil industry. Because ever since the King Idris was overthrown,
59.
Really, yes, exactly, 42 years ago, 1969, ever since the overthrow of a monarchy that had kept Libya absolutely poor and underdeveloped. By nationalizing the oil, Libya was able to modernize a great deal.
He spread it around, the wealth.
He absolutely did, and he did other things with it that raised the whole development level of Libya. In other words, there were ports and refineries and pumping stations and pipelines directly into Europe under the Mediterranean. All kinds of things were constructed by Libya for the processing of this oil and gas. Also, the most unusual thing in the world, they took the underground water aquifer, which is huge, and made the largest, the only underground river in the world. This provided fresh water for Libyan cities, and water today is a commodity.
There are huge deposits of fossil water equal to the Great Lakes under the deserts of the Sahara that can be tapped.
That can
in an
be
age
tapped.
where water is going to be crucial.
And they
4 million cubic meters of water a day being brought up to the
They were tapping
north.
that, and they were using it not only for consumption for the people, but they were also ending the desertifying of the desert, the extension of the desert, and actually bringing back whole parts of Libya. These are important accomplishments.
Yes, they could. They could make that part of Libya to the north bloom like the Imperial Valley in California when they got water. And it's a crucial thing that's going to be more crucial all the time, That was a great investment.
Now, in the bombing and in the destruction, because when you look at what was destroyed in terms of housing, in terms of hospitals, infrastructure, and also even the huge steel fabrication plant where the pipes for this underground river were put together, that was also bombed. the water, everything that's needed for civilian survival. And it's a war crime, even in the midst of a war, to target what civilians need. And that's exactly what NATO targeted again and again and again in Libya. And now, why the anger, though? Yeah. That's what I think it's important to discuss. Why this determination to destroy Libya?
Well, I could talk to that, but you can too.
Well, let's really talk about that.
Well, let me say, I'm part of a seminar, University Seminar at Colombia, and we had an address by a fellow who was he was very much involved in the political system here in the United States around energy policy. And the fellow who wrote, I forget his case, who writes on energy so well, and he said the personage of Libya was really important after that, because prior to that, as he laid it out very knowledgeably, and geopolitically real and everything, he said that the relationship between the host countries on oil prior to Gaddafi had been worked out, let's just say, largely about 50-50. And Gaddafi came along, and he insisted with Arm & Hammer. I had done a program with Arm & Hammer way back. He was the chairman of Occidental Petroleum, major contractor there for oil. And he insisted upon, Gaddafi insisted 55-45 for the country of origin of the oil. It was fought, or they tried to get it fought within the American system. It didn't work. It held, and it gave huge impetus to giving great power to OPEC. That's something that would be very disrupting to the Western interests, oil interests, the capitalist thing. That was something that stuck in the craw of the West. He also expelled the United States military forces from the Wheelus Air Force Base, major force by which America could project power in Africa, where they have interests to exploit and so forth. Two of the things he had. And then one last thing, I'll do it real quick. I don't want to dwell on it beyond just the normal geopolitical imperialistic critique that can be brought. But he also set up this system where he created a system of participatory democracy, which is a progressive thing on the world scale, beyond representative democracy, the thing that we count as legitimate for the ages. And also he set up a system where private sector was allowed to exist, and yet the income was the ownership of any private sector entity had to be owned by the people who made it up, and pay no wages. So he questioned the idea of the acceptance of a wage system where the capital assets are all owned by people of a certain class, plutocrats by and large, and the others are only laborers within that. They had to be owners of the capital assets as a way of distributing demand. And he set up a thing where all the human index indicators for Libya went from being the poorest in the world to just the highest, certainly in Africa, rivaling Europe in about 20 years, through socialized process.
Let's go back
all
to
of
that,
that's quite a contribution.
I think that was the real thing that he did that made the U.S. and the Europeans determined to destroy him. And that is, regardless of how you figure the percentages, what was done in Libya was that rather than investing that money simply in Western banks or handing it over to Boeing, GE, General Dynamics, and whatnot for weapons systems from the U.S., which they're more than happy when Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, and so on, all these oil-rich countries take the entire wealth of the people and invest it in weapon systems and in U.S. banks. And that's where it's held. So just in Libya, instead, it went for the development of the whole population. This food subsidy, people owning their own homes, the idea of free health care and education. See, that's what hasn't been done in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. You have there a tiny fraction of the population who are labeled as citizens, and the rest are undocumented workers who have no standing, no rights, live really in metal containers under some of the most onerous labor conditions in the world. That's not what happened in Libya. No, as a matter of fact, the workers who came from throughout Africa to help also, from many parts of the world, to help in the construction in Libya, had also a very high standard of living. But Gaddafi did one other thing that was very dangerous, I think, in terms of Western banks wanting to destroy him. He said, let's take $90 billion of the reserves that Libya held, and build a united African federation, have an African currency so that every country individually doesn't have to go hat in hand to the IMF and the World Bank, have these incredible onerous conditions put on them. He said, let's have one united currency. It can be backed
by gold.
With Libyan gold.
They got a lot.
That was a real threat to U.S. banks, who have an unequal relationship with every African country. So that, to them, represented a real danger. Gaddafi made many concessions to the West. He agreed to all kinds of things that, in a certain sense, left him disarmed.
Particularly after 2003.
After he saw what the U.S. did to Iraq, the destruction of the country.
I know, it was horrible what
of
happened
the
in
cities.
Iraq.
That really, he did try to make a deal with the West to buy time. At the same time, he didn't give up the idea of developing all of Africa. And that is what made in the West, the big banks say that they wanted to get rid of him no matter what.
Because he was
so they set out to destroy not only Gaddafi, but the entire system, the infrastructure and the political, the government of Libya. And all this was done in the name of supporting a ragtag group of competing
tribal
gangsters, really. I mean, they really were gangsters. They were unable to carry out one military operation, not one. Every single one of them
was backed by predators.
NATO bombs, and they would sit there like vultures, just waiting to go and pick up the dead after there was a carpet bombing. There were more than 10,000.
10,000, I had told 9 to 10,000 sorties.
Bombing sorties. There were some, I don't know, 20,000 sorties, but actually 10,000 where there were actual bombs. They were also being blasted from ships from the water's edge. Every one of the most of the major cities of Libya are right on the Mediterranean. And so there was, now all this was done in the name of a no-fly, imposing a no-fly zone.
To protect citizens. And it came down to
Libya wasn't flying one plane, not even a helicopter.
I know,
So here they said we're imposing a no-fly zone, but anything on the ground that moved, they were destroying.
And they gave them, and then they even got up to where now our purpose is to kill them.
Exactly.
Secretary Clinton actually said that. Let's hope we kill them.
It sounded like a Hollywood gunslinging
Didn't it sound like
Western.
Godfather or something, like a rub out in the north side of Chicago or something? That's
Dead or alive.
Dead or alive, that kind of sounded like Bush, kind of in a way.
And even where Gaddafi was found, now what was it that NATO was doing? There were cars fleeing a city they had been bombing nonstop for 2 months in Sirte. And as cars would flee, they would bomb the cars, and then these vultures, transitional council they're called, but these vultures, as cars and convoys and all different people escaping were bombed, they would go and pick up and kill those who were fleeing. And in that they suddenly identified Gaddafi as one of the people, and we've seen on the videos the way in which he was brutally attacked, really.
One question that could be, well, and he also supported all, after the Second World War, there was a United Nations was formed because decolonization after Columbus, it had gone Eurocentric colonization of the whole world. They were backing off from that in Africa. There was liberation movements coming. Libya was the first to be recognized by the UN in 1951 and everything, but it was there. And he supported all the liberation movements, anti-colonial, European colonial operations in Africa. And he also supported, in a general sense, what is called in the wisdom schools the least among us, the poor.
That's right.
And so forth. He really genuinely did. He has the respect of almost all of the really integral persons of the Amerindian nations, both North and Southern Hemisphere, for having supported them against the European colonization and devastation of civilization in the Western Hemisphere. Anyone, black people by and large who've been enslaved and know what it means to be in that kind of position, support the man very much. So you've got somebody he supports, not those that are meeting in 12-star hotels and at the top of society and all kinds of things, the rich and powerful, plutocrats that own everything and have the geopolitical power. He was supporting a mass movement that could be resonating in I think he'll emerge as a martyr, and that in a martyred kind of sense will resonate with the spirit of what's going on downtown New York City and across the world in terms of something to benefit the people rather than the political class du jour with all the money and power.
I think he'll absolutely be remembered worldwide. Any people who resist, someone who is determined to get down fighting for their people, for the sovereignty of Libya,
for the
and
mass
also
of the people,
for the very idea that all Africa should be free of the control and domination of corporate power and the banks.
Yeah, and the Eurocentric.
He will be seen, I do think, very much because he could have made any deal in the end, and very much chose to continue the fight. Now that will be an important example, and I think we've already seen how the White House claiming with great glee in Iraq how they had, this was the end of the story.
Yeah,
mission
it's all
accomplished.
over now. Yeah, we can go and bring democracy and all the rest.
And they claimed the same thing after they both captured and then executed Saddam Hussein.
Yeah, right.
It was not the end.
Yeah.
People fought, in a way, all the harder. And so much is destroyed in Libya. That the idea that there will be peace or stability when people have lost so much and you have gangs who are unable to reconstruct
anything. Seems that way. It's tribal enlargement.
I don't. That tribal can also either weld societies together. And certainly for 42 years in Libya, that was true. So it's not, I think there are Eurocentric words we don't necessarily want to use. But what was important, I think, which does not exist now, is that NATO itself is a military machine.
I know.
They are incapable of helping to in any way rebuild a society. We saw that in Afghanistan, where they were incapable of, while they could drop thousands of bombs, they were unable to pick up the rubble even of tanks on the roadway, unable to rebuild anything, unable to bring the people potable water, electricity, schools, education, even though they said, oh, we're going to remake Afghanistan, it'll be a new Marshall Plan. They couldn't do the first part
Not
of it.
at all.
Iraq, the same thing. Iraq, they said, oh, so much oil wealth, it'll be up and running, it'll be transformed.
They'll greet us
in
like
6
liberators.
months. Right. None of that happened. Even in the capital city in Iraq today, in Baghdad, people have, at best, 3 to 4 hours of electricity a day.
Is that current?
That's current. I mean, to not be able in
with
8
all the
years,
billions of tablets, pallets full of dollars that they're bribing people with over there.
But what they do see is they bring in contractors, and the people who are collaborators are thieves. And so the idea of actually drawing on the energy of the people to rebuild their society, that is what, as a military machine, the Pentagon is unable to do. And in Libya, the same experience that we've seen in past wars of conquest, I think we will really see again. That there'll be lots of press releases about how some soldiers are painting a school or handing out candy bars or things like that. But in terms of providing for people and reorganizing society and providing stability, that they're unable to do. The idea that they're coming to bring democracy, they're coming to bring the iron boot of colonial conquest.
It's neo-colonialism.
It truly is.
And imperialism and the Marxian recognition or stage of capitalism that is there and everything. And so
it's, the rule of the banks. That's really what they want to bring to Libya, and that's what they have here.
That's what they have all over the world.
Right.
I mean, all over the world they have that. That's really just about the way we read it. I think he's likely to emerge as not only a martyr of having done great things, and the fact that there was the human index development is top of the mark for Libya under Gaddafi, say, before all this started going on, indicates that, as you say, everybody owned their own home, they owned their own automobile, they had education right up to university for men and women. He was women liberation in a very real sense, had a secular tinge to it, so he's not all caught up in some of the tribal traditions of more backwardly thinking people vis-a-vis women and that sort of thing. He was a progressive force in the evolution of world culture and so on. How did it develop, do you think? I know there always was. I've been there about 8 or 9 times, been all over and I really have a great feeling for it. I thought he was ahead of history's curve in a very large sense, that the Ancien regime of Louis XIV and the hereditary feudal order 1,000 years after Rome was challenged by the United States of America in 1776, they set up a pattern that they're now assuming their pattern for the world, which has been adopted in large measure in terms of the world order, is now thought of as being historically legitimate. And now, this thing that's developing in the world, they're beginning to see that system that's in place, calling itself historically legitimate, is not adequate to what the future requires or may well be effectively demanded by the people because it doesn't serve the people, and inherently and structurally it cannot. Does any of that make sense to you? But one thing I would add to it, if I could, what was the source of the hatred directed at him in a society where so many of the human needs had been met, in fact, and that they were progressing? It was moving well. All the indicators were. They were almost up on a scale with Europe within 20 years. Why would there be such animosity directed by the people out of Benghazi and the Senussi and all of that against the person who had done so much for the country? What's the source of that in geopolitical terms?
Well,
or what do you understand?
There's always...
There must, one last little addendum. There must be lingering support. They went from the poorest people in the world. They had a Holocaust. A third of their population wiped out under Italian fascism. They had suffered. And then they went to where they were rivaling Europe in terms of the living standards. There must be, at some level, support for what was achieved by him because it was so monumental and in such a short period of time where he spread it around socially. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. There's no society that is a perfect society.
Okay, fair enough.
And it's always possible to find people with real grievances who can point to real shortcomings.
Yeah.
I mean, Libya was not a paradise. There were real accomplishments, enormous steps forward, good lessons even to today.
Good what?
Good lessons of what can be done with when the resources are nationalized and used.
And a model for other parts of the
right.
world. Yeah.
That doesn't mean that there won't be forces who, on a religious basis, maybe have a different interpretation. There were certainly, that was one current.
Yeah.
There also is the old royal family and forces who were expropriated, who may want to come back in. There are people who think maybe they can get a better deal.
They can get a better deal by kissing the hem of American imperialism.
And there are those who very much look to the West and the idea of Libya looking to embracing, supporting development of all of Africa, they opposed.
Because they would rather have that money for themselves to go gamble in Monaco or something.
The idea of providing subsidies to the whole population.
They did.
But there were people who didn't agree with that.
That was disallowed by the West, was it not, under the American terms after 2003?
Right, but there were people who really said, no, we don't want to do this. In other words, they wanted money to invest. They were for privatizing. So it's not a large number. Yeah. It's a number that actually is so small that every Western source admitted that the opposition, beyond being able to find a bunch of guys who can shoot off guns endlessly in front of the camera, were unable to militarily organize any opposition or socially organize an opposition. So could they get some armed gangs? Yes. But they did not have, from any one family or grouping, a large enough grouping to actually challenge Gaddafi.
Right. And
that's why NATO came in from the get-go.
Do you think CIA, DIA operatives and so forth were setting this up from a longer period of time, like they tried to do with the Bay of Pigs in Cuba?
Well,
and
very
so forth?
much so.
Yeah.
There was a political opposition in Libya that the CIA had openly maintained. It was called the Libyan Salvation Front.
Right, that's right.
They kept like Contra
Yeah,
camps,
like
in Nicaragua, or you could look at many other countries, right on the border, right near Benghazi, between Egypt and Libya.
Derna,
had been there 30 years, actually.
Okay.
A whole sort of grouping that was financed, that had also an office in Washington, an office in London. Now, it was never a strong enough group, but with the upsurge that was shaking both Egypt, Tunisia, and the Arab world.
Shook things up.
Yes. And so a grouping, okay, they could organize a demonstration, yes. They could take over a police station, yes. But could they really be a contending force? No. And so to protect them, NATO came in, and by relentlessly bombing Gaddafi, it's amazing that the resistance could survive for 7 months. And I think there's every projection that it will continue in many different forms into the future, because the drive of people historically in this epoch is to be free, to liberate themselves, to get out from under the control of the banks.
Might be worth a mention, if you don't mind. The United States of America fought in 1776. It was amazing. Cornwallis, at the end of that war, had a Southern strategy, and there was something like 65% of the white males that were eligible were on the side of King George. And there was only 30% were on the side of the people who were trying to make a revolution. And they made that, and then we won the war, so we started the United States of America. But do you remember they came and they burned Washington in 1812? In the War of 1812, they were able to burn all the government buildings against those who had been defeated in the war. Do you understand? So now in Libya, they go and do it 30 years, 40 years after he made that revolution. They still are holding on to the old, and they're resentful of having lost. And there are also Tories, or representing Tories, who are in sync with the old monarchy and with the imperialist power du jour, where there's a lot of money to be made if you can make a deal.
Well, that's
in a traitorous kind
that's
of
what
way.
The U.S. knows. They maintain an opposition, an organized opposition, keep it alive politically against any country where they don't like the internal policies. They were able to maintain an organized opposition, whether it was in Yugoslavia, whether it was in Eastern Europe. You look at it anywhere around the world, it's in China, or it's Syria, or every country, they have a force that they help to maintain, which is on the sidelines, awaiting an opportunity, to move in.
To strike for the ancient regime, the ancient regime, and so legitimate power being asserted, apparently. At least that's what they would project. We're legitimate. Our pattern is legitimate, and they want to impose it on the world in an imperialistic sense, no?
See, this is also, when you say being ahead of the curve, and you're referring actually to points in U.S. history in the past.
That I was.
It's important for us to just remember that from the very founding of the U.S., there was slavery.
Yeah, I know.
There were no rights for women. Of course, no rights for indigenous people, native population.
I know.
So you had really a very small grouping of white property owners who said they wanted democracy among themselves versus having a king.
As opposed to the hereditary. It had held
history
for 1,000
has
years.
Gone far beyond that.
But remember, the French is the divine right of kings. It's by the structure of the universe. But God gave us the right. So when you get to those kind of things, they think that they are legitimate historically, and these other forces are just troublemakers that just don't understand that they belong in our paradigm. And that's what we're doing to the world now, and our paradigm is not adequate to what the future requires.
Exactly.
Okay?
Exactly.
Okay, that's a big pattern.
I very much, I very much agree with that, because what you have, I would really think at this point, is a group of dinosaurs.
Yeah, okay.
In many ways, in so many ways, capitalism is at a dead end.
Okay.
It's unable to provide for the global population.
That's right.
It's unable to provide the most basic needs, and yet there's such enormous wealth and resources today on a world scale.
Yeah.
Yet poverty is greater than it's ever been.
That's right. And
I think that's what the people, let's say at Occupy Wall Street.
Yeah, right. God bless them, one and all. Every lad and lassie down there, boy.
And it isn't happening just in New York City.
No, it's happening.
It's more than 100 cities around the U.S. It's happening throughout Europe.
Good.
You can look at Tahrir Square.
Yeah.
And all of these occupations are very much forces who are asserting their both rights versus the 1%. When they talk about themselves as the 99%, of course that 99% isn't homogeneous.
Yeah,
there
right.
are some who are much more oppressed within it, because there's racism, there's all manner of inequality in this society. But one point of it about talking about the 1%, or the real owners and controllers who own most of the wealth.
Thank you.
Those one thousandths of 1%. It's really a small handful.
I know, it's a tiny plutocratic class that own, and that's reflecting a reality.
They benefit.
That 99.1% is not so off base in terms of the ownership of capital assets, and the capital assets are becoming, this is something we could talk about, are becoming responsible increasingly through time in a ratio with labor to the productive process, and it's all owned by a tiny plutocratic class everywhere.
And it's more and more concentrated.
Right.
The amount, really, of wealth that this grouping holds, they have no hope of even being able to invest it.
Right.
It's so vast. And this is why I say at a dead end. It's such an enormous amount of concentrated wealth. Yeah. And you have technology that's so productive that there's no hope. Given what workers are paid today, of purchasing back what they're producing.
Well, they don't have a way of getting demand in the hands of the people to clear the market of what might be produced in even in a good and living way.
Right.
It's unworkable.
There's real
because you have to have
happening.
demand in the hands of the people to clear the market, if nothing else. Okay?
Exactly.
And that's
so
a problem.
It's a more and more irrational system than it has been at any time in the past, and it is increasingly coming up against an awareness for people thinking it does not have to be this way.
That's right. So it's coming up, and they're very wise down there, if I think. They're going horizontal. They're not getting on one issue only. They're not going to be put into that box like they could be shot down on the media or in the political process where you can outdo them, outspend them. They're going horizontal to a systems understanding of the thing for a massive change, because the whole system, it's not just one country, it's the whole system historically is out of date with something that the future requires that's aborning.
They're making many, they're making many demands. There's an action every single day.
Good.
And sometimes 2 and 3 and 5 actions a day, and demonstrations and protests and groups coming to join. It's really quite an important development.
And growing quickly.
And despite every effort to shut it down in New York, in Oakland, we could see the horrible attack. In Boston and Chicago and Atlanta, one attack after another.
Did you get a report, Sarah, back in Oakland? Did they succeed in breaking the back of that, or was there more support coming after that got on the television and everything for the movement itself, and they got back into the space and reasserted their claim? Or were they able to break the back and everybody went home and went to bed?
No, I don't think it's broken. There's a great deal of support. And as a matter of fact, there's a real call for a mass shutdown. They're saying general strike. Who knows?
Sorrell. God bless general strike.
But they're saying a real shutdown in Oakland next Wednesday.
Oh, good.
November 2nd.
Good. We should support that.
Yes, that's exactly.
That will have happened the day before this airs.
That's one of the things that we've been very engaged in doing.
Okay, good.
And that
international,
right. How to put out a call to groups all over the country and all over the world.
Get behind Oakland.
Say, yes, let's all have actions next Wednesday.
Good idea.
In solidarity with Oakland, in support of the encampment, the occupation there.
Good.
That's the best defense.
Yeah.
Right here.
Good,
it was
good,
very
good.
important, for example.
Realize that's going to be yesterday when this program airs. Okay,
so that
but
people
you
will
can
be able
prophetic.
to see.
Be
That's
prophetic right here. That's good. We need some prophetic vision. Yeah.
I think
You heard
when
it
you
here
look
first, folks.
when you look at what happened just after Mayor Bloomberg, billionaire, multi-billionaire, whose wealth has quadrupled since he became mayor.
Yeah.
But he tried to shut, when there was a mass arrest on the Brooklyn Bridge, 700.
There were 700 were arrested.
780 people arrested. Right.
Yeah.
Complete police setup.
Yeah.
There was a huge labor demonstration. I think 4 days later, in support of Occupy Wall
labor's
Street.
coming in now.
And
the
they
unions,
really came out.
Yeah.
Now, Bloomberg waited about a week and a half, and then he made another effort to shut down Zuccotti
When we were
Park.
going to clean it or
when
something.
he said they were going to clean it.
Couldn't pull it off.
And the number of groups that mobilized, including the AFL-CIO, sending unprecedented, sent out an
maybe
email,
the labor can get some
sent a
clout,
text urging people to go to Zuccotti Park. By that morning, when the cleaning was going to take place, not only was the entire plaza, but all the streets around. I mean, people came out in the tens of thousands.
That's so encouraging.
It was amazing.
And it's not only just young people. You expect they're tough and resilient and all that. You got grandmothers and grandfathers and people from all levels. And it's not just one little group. It's not even just Woodstock off in the mountain.
No.
It's the whole society is beginning to wake up to the need for a systems-wide, qualitative transformation of the whole international order.
People came down there and
Is that not blowing in the wind, Bobby Dylan would have said in his prime? Or is it, hopefully, blowing in the wind?
It is,
real
and
change.
this is we should see this also as a first wave.
Okay.
Whatever happens at this stage, it's a movement that's just beginning to assert itself.
Okay, and we ought to support it.
And completely.
Absolutely. Blankets.
And figure out how to bring more support to it. It's amazing, actually, when you're down there. People from all over the country, all over the world. The first days they were sending food, pizza orders, sandwiches, fruit, whatnot.
It's going to get
online,
cold.
people started sending sleeping bags, blankets, tarps, tents, all manner of material. Online donations. That has become monumental. They're getting more than a truck full of supplies a day.
Well, they would need more than a truck full. I remember, were you at Woodstock?
I'm saying a day.
Oh, I know, but okay, but a big truck, a railroad car, a car. They should start having containerizations of support from around the world with all kinds of blankets and sleeping bags and everything to support this thing.
Well, it's how to keep it going into the winter.
Right, it's going to get cold.
Strategizing and talking about student groups talking about buildings. When you look at what happened in Madison last year, that was the state capitol. That was an inside building. Because in the snows of Wisconsin, you can't be camping outside.
That's
so
true.
there are all kinds of different
It is going around the
ideas.
world, so there'd be support for these things going on around the world. There are climes to which we could go. Maybe we should do it down in Puerto Rico or anywhere in the world is messed up.
Well, and there also are occupations going on in Puerto Rico.
Good,
very important.
good. There should be.
That's right.
And it's systems, which I would like to get to maybe before the ends, but go ahead.
Yeah. See, thinking how to defend and bring new support to the occupations that are going on, how to actually rally the support of all the different progressive organizations that already exist in society.
And bring in some others who haven't thought of themselves as progressives, or even some who thought themselves conservative. You might be able to cotton onto some of those other, because
there
society is so many people in society are being ill-served.
Right, when you see the handmade signs down there
It's wonderful.
Really, of young people who are indentured for life.
With
loans
debt,
are so
huge.
And older people who are facing unemployment and they're 50 years old.
Foreclosures
no hope,
all over the place.
And
banking,
folks losing their homes.
Yeah.
And the rage, even, I think the folks who are losing their homes feel, here were the banks given this multi-trillion-dollar, $20 trillion in bailout money.
Yeah, and they just hoarded it.
They just hoarded it. There was no turnover of this huge number of
They call themselves
mortgage.
job creators, but
No, it's actually using it as an opportunity to seize more and more and more property.
Yeah.
2 million people in the U.S. already completely homeless.
The new leader,
and you know, there's a surplus of more than 9 million housing units just sitting empty and idle. So it's not that there's not enough to go around.
Right.
There's more than enough.
Whether or not there could be enough to go around for the whole world population in a new kind of way might be the promise of now and even on into the future at the level of potential, if we had a system that allowed us to do progressively what we can do for all of the citizens of the world, think whole systems, and also the ecology. We have that in our capability, which historically we haven't.
We really do. On a global scale.
Yeah, right.
On a global scale, not just in the U.S. There
yes,
is now
right. Oh, absolutely.
The capacity, the technology,
for life support,
and even the educational level. Take a small country like Cuba.
Yeah.
They provide more doctors and medical health technicians for the countries of the world than the World Health Organization on a volunteer basis.
Right. They were going to help with Katrina, remember, and they refused because they knew how to deal. Yeah.
And there's they provide the health service in Haiti and all different countries in Africa.
Yeah.
Now, there's that potential for many countries to do it, and educated youth who would be more than willing to go from many countries to help other countries raise the level. But that's not done.
No.
Instead, you have young people who end up, as I say, indebted, unemployed, and unable to contribute or participate in society. So that's what these encampments represent.
Yeah. Okay. Let me ask you something, because you've been on the barricades forever, and I appreciate enormously you and the work of Ramsey Clark. He should be a saint as far as his ability to call truth to power in a very legitimate, historically legitimate way. The inadequacy that's there. Where does it all go, and what is the promise, and how will? Let's just jump. I know it's hard, and I think I wouldn't want to violate anything. They want to keep it horizontal. They don't want to get strung out on one issue. They want to bring it comprehensive. I'm for that. I'm a Fuller guy and that kind of thing. Systems thinking. But where is it going? And when you say you've got the ability to provide for everybody in a unique historical way in the time that you and I sit here and talk, what is the implications of that? Just without going into the details, what is the promise of the future that this period of shaking up that could be, in the end, presenting a pattern that could be picked up massively by society as a qualitative transformation to bring in a new operating manual for spaceship Earth, that we see it in systems terms in the contemporary, and what is the promise of that coming out of, let's just call the progressive movement in your view? What would it look like? What would it be? What would the relationship of private property and government and those kind of things be in a world that is really adequate to liberate the human spirit in the fullness of the entire thing and the ecology? What would it look like, and what would be the dimensions of it?
I think the first question, what it would look like, it's important to think, what is it that's stopping this potential from being able to flower?
Okay, yeah.
The capitalist system itself, based on that a tiny handful can own what is socially produced by millions.
Okay, that's something,
And that if instead you had collective ownership in many, many different ways, if you did away with private ownership of the major resources and industries, it would transform and open up the potential for humanity right away. Keeping it constrained in this way, the only way in which they can hold on to their power and wealth is to keep the rest of the world divided. So racism is encouraged. All kinds of divisions.
Terrible.
Nationalism is encouraged.
Right.
The most backward ideas. It seeps down into culture and entertainment, which is really garbage.
There's strong anti-intellectual ways.
Yeah, they want to stop people. They want to stop people
Critical
from
thinking
thinking
is discouraged.
about what's possible to do.
Yeah.
Stop people from thinking not just about the questions of ownership, but really how their skills could be used to help many people.
Right.
Everything is distorted in this society now. So first of all, seeing what's stopping it is the most important step, because if you can break through that, break through the stranglehold not only of the banks, but what do the banks use? The banks use the military to enforce their rule, as they did in Libya, as they did in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Well, as they've done throughout history.
That's right.
All of history.
That's right.
There's never been a liberated order.
But there is now the potential, because technology is so productive.
Right.
In past times, you know, the scarcity was great, the surplus was tiny, people would fight over who would have enough to eat the next day. Right. That's no longer the possibility.
Since when? No, since when has it changed?
So without getting into that, I think seeing what's stopping it, and also being able to speak to more and more of the future of the youth, to fight for a future where there is collective ownership. That is
that's
very
your
important.
view,
I think for me that's the idea of socialism.
And you're a proud socialist, and that's
very
good.
much
Fine.
so.
Okay,
very
good.
much
Yeah,
so.
right.
Because I say, all right, capitalism is at a dead end. It can't solve any of the problems today.
Let me.
So we have to look in new directions.
Yeah.
We have to look in, if just the banks alone and their wealth was owned by all of society.
Owned by all of society. Okay, I want to get to that if we could.
Then there is, which we saw just an example, and it was done on a small basis for 6 million people, beginning to be done in a few years in Libya.
Yeah,
it didn't.
Right. Go ahead.
You could say people may have had grievances, this or that wasn't perfect, but it was an experiment. There can be hundreds of different experiments.
That may have been why they wanted to attack it. It's a potential model that was just
because a model, you would say, why are they so determined to destroy Cuba? Cuba doesn't have oil or any great rich resources.
It's a model.
But Cuba's a very dangerous idea.
Yeah.
And it's a dangerous idea, particularly throughout Latin America, but to the whole world. Because they, with very limited resources, have been able, as I say, to provide doctors, teachers, raise their own level. Again, not a perfect society, but they have shown the potential. And that is what the banks, the corporate owners, the military wants to shut down. Any example. In the same way that in an earlier time under slavery, why would the slave owners go after any of the maroon societies? Societies where slaves had escaped and built on the most
horrendous, Fugitive Slave Act, Dred Scott.
Exactly. They would go after any of the escaped slaves, and if they had built a little community on a mountaintop or in a swamp,
got to smash that.
The danger of an idea of people freeing themselves.
Okay. Could I address it a little bit and everything like that? So you say that, where to begin? I don't know. So that, what would you be your, have you read, I don't know if you've read Naomi Klein at all? Shock Doctrine? Do you think she makes sense to me? I think she writes well on economics and the human condition, sides with Amy on a lot of things and all that, Amy Goodman and that. And she had in that thing, but she said in that she was not, as I heard you talking, the idea is to get rid of the private sector. That's what you're in a sense saying, and everything be collective. That's something. She doesn't say that. She said she wants a mixed economy. She does not want to eliminate the private sector as an entity in the social order. And I'm not sure that I do. I know that when the newly coming in leader of China, which is a great force now, is an expert on dialectical materialism, on Karl Marx. And they count Karl Marx and the surplus labor theory of value and dialectical materialism as their religion in terms of organizing that society. And it's there. And then the thing is that the aim? We've got to get rid of, I don't want to go too extreme, Russia, they did away with it. They collectivized everything, and it got all power in the hands of a government. Everything was in the government. There was no tension between the private sector and the governmental section. Is that your vision?
No,
Everything would be in the
you're
government of good people.
Sweeping things and sort of putting them all on a funny ball. Let me just say.
Well, I'm just saying, what would it look like? Would there be a private sector in your view of the world or not?
There have been all kinds of experiments in different countries. And now there's a wealth of first experiments and all different revolutionary efforts for change. Some of them have succeeded. Some of them have been frayed in all different ways. And there's no perfect example.
Okay,
because
fair
all
enough.
of them
It's
came
synergetic.
from very, very poor, underdeveloped countries, desperately poor, and also countries that were made war on every minute of their existence.
Right, you are.
So they were forced to also build a whole military and repressive apparatus to stop invasion and to stop takeovers. So none of them were perfect societies because they lived in a state of constant warfare. So just to finish the point.
Go ahead.
Private ownership of all manner of private materials is fine. And the same thing with private and small businesses have existed in all sorts of socialist countries. The great wealth, the banking, and the natural resources, such as the oil and the gas and whatnot, the big industries, that's what you're talking about with collective ownership. That doesn't mean people having restaurants, exchanging meals, food, coupons, jewelry, fashion, design, entertainment, all manner of things. Wouldn't, if anything, that would be culturally enriched, because what happens in this society is there has been the complete destruction of almost anything that is artistic, that's individually produced. It's now all mass production. And it actually has cut human creativity.
Well, okay, but I wonder, it's also been that it's created a tremendous productive capability that does not require, in the production of, I would even say, goods of civilization. Put aside the really important things like the goods goods and services, and the goods of civilization, which are all the things like love and art and all the important things that are put aside when you just focus on the capability of the private sector. But the technology has become more and more responsible, and that goods and services, mass things. A combine is an example that can produce 50,000 barrels of grain, and it doesn't even have a driver. But the labor input to it on a ratio it's all going toward, the production is all done by capital instruments that are all owned by a tiny plutocratic class.
And
why can't the private sector entities, the capital formed, be done in a way where the ownership of those private property entities, the large ones, not just the coffee shops, but be owned democratically? That's what Gaddafi set up. He didn't do away with the private sector. He set it up, and the capital is formed where the distribution of ownership is sent democratically to everybody as an instrument of income distribution, so the people will have the ability to clear the market.
That's a very viable.
But that's not doing away with private sector.
There's no one way to do this.
But when I asked you, you said we got to have everything in the public sector. Do away with the private sector.
Well, the public sector can mean all kinds of things that people themselves can define. That's what's most important.
Technology intervenes.
And the idea that there's only one way to do this. The most important thing is to take it out of the hands of the very few and say that people themselves can decide these questions in a much larger collective basis.
Okay, I think maybe that's what Wall Street's about, isn't it? Occupy,
And also people's understanding of these issues will change and grow. But as I say, the big problem for today is how to get past that stranglehold. It's like there's a bottleneck that is stopping the potential that now exists for the human race. And this wave of rebellion everything that can be done to support it and to defend it and to make sure that it's not destroyed by the repression that we've just seen in Libya.
In Oakland, too. Yeah, you see in a minor way in Oakland.
That we're seeing in Oakland, that we saw in New York with mass arrests, that we see when the Pentagon makes drone attacks all over the world.
Those drones are like some dystopic, awful, dystopic
but they're the same,
science fiction
they're the same
movie.
way. This is the idea that any leader, any grouping,
can kill. They can kill anybody anytime they want, just from Nevada. They can just kill them.
Right.
And it's
or
dystopic.
The announcement just this last week that U.S. troops are going into southern
East Africa.
Sudan.
Yeah.
Right. The Democratic Republic of Congo.
Drones are going,
That's right.
And you don't even have to risk losing a pilot. It's so easy.
Isn't it? Right.
You can just do it from your desktop, you know, and that kind of thing. Yeah.
So it's seeing this is the problem we face. As people become clearer on the problem, who is the problem, that is an enormously important idea, because ideas, when they take hold in a collective sense, that changes history. What was acceptable before becomes no longer acceptable.
Do you think we live in a time of qualitative transformation? Maybe the fulfilling of 200,000 years of human existence on this planet? The weapons now, the extension of consciousness has become, since about 1970 by the modeling, species lethal. I think they remain. Do you agree with that?
Yeah,
that
sure,
if there were to be an unleashing of a war, like Barbara Tuchman, First World War, nothing rational, we have the ability now to cut off evolution of consciousness that the human species represents. And that wasn't possible even in 1962 with a Cuban Missile. There would have been some scrag, but since about 1970, apparently, we have the capability. We were talking about capability. We have a capability to destroy the entire species, signals something existentially new in the universe. And on the other side, you were hitting at it, we have an unqualified, unprecedented capability of taking care of everybody within an ecological context that is there in the technological thing. We don't have a system that lets us do what we're capable of doing, but we live in a time of qualitative transformation, maybe even on to transcending history and bringing in a whole new kind of vision of what the future requires and now allows, if you can understand what I mean.
Yeah, if we can grow that idea, see, that is the greatest threat to those who are willing to destroy the human race in order to defend or protect their
With due
position.
respect, we only got a couple seconds left. If you have something that's in order, intellectuals in that, you have something in order, it would be something that could be liberating of the serfs who have been enslaved in systems of scarcity throughout all of human history that may have been transcended, and you could liberate the human society to each realize their own potential and within an ecological kind. And the trick would be to have something that not only could do that, but could also be inclusive of those responsible for the outdated institutions they're trying to reify out of ignorance, so that it includes everybody rather than having an enemy against which to direct the ire, except ignorance. What do you think? So we can include them in a halting way, but include them to stay their hand, if nothing else. And then also there might be a way of including their thinking in a larger pattern that is truly liberating. Can you understand? Any hope for that? Or do we have to keep the enemy?
I think let's try to organize people.
That's a good idea right there.
Organize people to understand their potential. And sometimes the best way to do that is in the streets and actually challenging the powers that be.
It would seem
when people are determined to stand up to the police, when they're determined to come back again and again, so it's actually the doing of it that makes it also the mental transformation.
And let's hope it's going, and that we're privileged to live in that time. We could have lived 1,000 years ago. No way. It's now. Isaac Asimov said the defining generation, the defining moment. I'm wondering if we're getting that sense emanating through the Occupy Wall Street and everything. Do you understand what I mean? It's a defining moment. And are you optimistic, pessimistic for the human prospect?
Well, I'm an optimist.
You're an optimist. Good for you, girl. Good for you. Yeah, we may be able to pull it off, right?
Well, I think if you're organizing for change, you really do believe, you see the potential of it, and you know that it's there.
Well, if there's anybody who's been organizing for change, you and Ramsey Clark and all the good people at the International Action Center, and your take is really interesting. Thank you for such a very, very, very well-led life that continues on a progressive view for bringing positive change to this planet. I thank you very much for all your work enormously. And you write like an angel.
Oh, well, thank you. Okay.
Yeah. And I want to thank you for coming in.
Check the website.
Yes, by all means, get to the website. It is IACcenter.org.
Yeah,
IACcenter.org. A really good IAC, and it's Sara Flounders, who's down there, a great group of people. Thanks a lot for coming. May you be right, and just let's get a lot of support to the people who are really stirring things up, and may you be right right involved in that whole movement, as am I. So
I'm very much involved in it but it's the future. It's the young people.
That's what we got to relate to the future and the potential that the future holds for maybe liberation at the end of a long panel. The whole existence of human society, we may be coming to a new relationship. When you get to where you're transcending maybe material scarcity, other rules can come in that might be able to be inclusive of everybody in a way that the wisdom schools would have admired. But we live in an interesting time.
If just one of these occupations in any of these countries takes things in an even more radical or revolutionary direction, see, at a time when everybody is watching and looking for new lessons, that may happen also.
Yeah.
But what we're seeing now, and as a matter of fact, look at the struggle that's being put up in Greece. That's incredible.
And it's all interrelated, isn't it?
And there are a lot of people here looking at Greece.
Yeah,
so it's the way ideas feed off each other.
Yeah, and isn't it an exciting time? They come in over the transom every day. It's an exciting time to be out. Thanks for all the good work. Thanks for viewing. We'll be coming back again tomorrow. That's it for now. Thanks, Sarah, very much. Okay, so I guess that we could go on and everything, but
I couldn't tell at what point. Boy, that scarf looks like it's a sausage around my neck.
Well, it'll look different when it's on a one-shot. You know? No, you look fine. You look great and everything. Besides, it's you look just fine.
It's okay.